What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, I'm gonna pose a question to you guys right quick. Y'all let me know down in the comments section. What in the hell is this?
But to me, that is why Kilmar Abrego Garcia's specific case, the case of the gentleman who's a makeup artist out of California who was also sent to that prison. That is why the 75% of the folks who have been sent, the men who have been sent there that don't have criminal records, that is why this is so important. Because if they could do it to them, if they could snatch students off the street without any pushback or recourse, they will do it to any of us. And to be very clear, it's going to be the people of color and vulnerable communities that are next in line.
I think that's right, and that's certainly part of why the African-American community is so strongly behind the supporting Kilmar.
Yeah, we're like, we are not for this.
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to how people get from deporting somebody who was slated for deportation. I'm sorry, we're not talking about Abrego Garcia for the news article. This is just fascinating to me. How do we get from deporting criminal aliens to deporting the black community? Like, how do we get from that to that? Where is the disconnect up here in these people's brains that makes them think that Donald Trump's just going to go around and start snatching up citizens off the street? Like, in what world do we live in where that is happening? Is it even thought about happening, right? Like, do these people really think that Donald Trump is just going to go get rid of citizens, right? Like, it's the corporate news. These people are the reason we are so bifurcated in this country. It is my firm belief that if it was not for the media constantly manipulating and lying to everybody in the world, if everybody was well informed, you know, the people at least that want to be informed, if they were well informed on the truth, you know, gain your opinions after that, but well informed on the truth, we would not have any room to debate facts. And that seems to be what the hell we're doing today. Because constantly, I'm having to come up and say, nope, this wasn't true, blah, 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 blah. They're lying about this, they're manipulating that. And it's like, where does it end here? Like, when can we get to some sort of place where we can all agree on reality? Like, that's just my question for the comments section. When can we agree on reality? Because the Democrats, the mainstream news, they're continuing to lie, just blatantly lie about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They're nitpicking any little thing that they can find an angle to nitpick, and then they're just exploding that, expanding it out, and running with that narrative. Like, oh, it's a Maryland man, all because he was in the country illegally and he happened to be residing in Maryland. Like, no, he was a criminal alien, right? We got rid of him expeditiously because he was a suspected MS-13 gang member. But once again, and you know, Democrats come with, there's no proof of this. Well, you know what? There doesn't need to be any proof. He already had his due process. He was slated for deportation. I'm sorry, goodbye. That's it. That is absolutely it. And, you know, they're just going insane, as a matter of fact. They are going absolutely insane over this. And it blows my mind, once again, that Democrats don't care about the truth on this. They don't care about the truth on a lot of issues. They just don't. They're just going to go with the talking points, and that is it. This is why you don't get these people to come in and debate issues like this, because they will be struck down. I mean, sure, you'll see them on Piers Morgan, but on Piers Morgan, you can just lie. And, you know, sure, you might get called out for it, but does it even matter at that point? Because, you know, in real debates, the moderator will stop you. No, this is not factually true, blah, 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 blah. It just doesn't work that way in real life. But I've got a news article for you guys. And yeah, we're talking about illegal immigration. I'm sorry, but we're not talking about old Kilmar over here. We're talking about something wholly different, y'all. Check this out. Justice Alito issues scathing dissent to SCOTUS ruling barring Trump from deporting Tren de Aragua members. Okay, so Donald Trump issued the Alien Enemies Act and started rounding up a whole host of gang members, MS-13, Tren de Aragua, blah, 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 you name it. And, you know, the ACLU and Democrats come in and sue the administration to stop him from doing this. Okay, so Trump has already pretty much been barred from using the Alien Enemies Act. And I know what you might be thinking. Well, he's lying. They said he could use it. Yeah, they did say he could use it. But you know what they did? It pretty much nullifies the Alien Enemies Act because they have to go through habeas hearings now. What's the point of the Alien Enemies Act then? The Alien Enemies Act was to get foreign invaders out of the country expeditiously. In other words, they do not get due process. If you're in the country illegally and suspected of being a terrorist, we don't want you to go into court. We don't have time for that. I'm sorry. You just get booted out. But, you know, key point, you have to be a criminal alien for that to take place, as a matter of fact. And I think these people's disconnect is, okay, so Donald Trump's using the Alien Enemies Act to round up terrorists or suspected terrorists. We'll say that will be fair. You know, sure, would we all like to know if these people are actual Tren de Aragua members? Yeah, for the most part, sure. But you know what? I really don't care if they're in the country illegally. If the underlying, you know, the limiting factor, if you will, is they're criminal aliens, I'm sorry. I could care less if they get a habeas hearing or not. If they are illegal aliens, get them out of the country. Because the only due process that they receive is, are you an American citizen? Yes or no. If no, bye. Sorry. If yes, prove it. Can you prove it? If you can't prove it, bye. If you can prove it, hang on, we got a lawsuit on our hands. That's it. That is all you get. Nothing beyond that. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, I guess, if you want to go there. But let's get into this thing right quick. Justice Alito was joined by Justice Clarence Thomas in dissenting the Supreme Court's ruling that the Trump administration must not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court. The decision was released in the wee hours of Saturday morning, right? So, hang on, what do they mean by putative right quick? Well, that generally means, you know, that generalized, that's what it means. They generally are this or whatever, you know. So it's like, okay, so all right, I see what you're doing here in the wee hours of Saturday morning. Wonder why this is. This is a fascinating article, by the way. The case brought to the court by the ACLU was an attempt to block the deportation of Venezuelan nationals from a holding facility in Texas. The ACLU also filed their case for emergency action with the Northern District Court in Texas, as well as the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. The dissent from Alito took issue with the court for having hastily and prematurely granted unprecedented emergency relief. At issue for Alito was the term putative class, which he said the court does not define. Although the order does not define putative class, it appears that the court means all members of the class that the habeas petitioners, the ACLU, sought to have certified, namely all non-citizens in custody in the Northern District of Texas who were, are, or will be subject to the March 2025 presidential proclamation entitled Invocation of the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by Tren de Aragua and or its implementation, Alito wrote. So that is a lot of people, by the way. They have a lot of detainees under the putative class that they're talking about here, the Tren de Aragua members. So they're putting a hold on all of that. I wonder why that is. Like, most of these people, a lot of them have already had their due process, right? But, you know, some of them haven't. But why put a hold on all of them? That's what I don't get. But that's what they've done. But they've also done something very, very unusual as well. Check this out. Turning the illegal immigrants into a class was also at issue for Solicitor General John Sauer, or John D. Sauer. I don't know, they must have put that backwards on accident, who said in his filing for the court to dissolve their ruling that illegal immigrants cited for deportation under the Alien Enemies Act are not a class because each circumstance is inherently too individualized for them to be considered all as one. The New York Times indicated that the ACLU used the term class to indicate that the justices should protect the detainees as a part of a proposed class action. Sounds like a bit of a wordplay right there, but it's not. It's totally separate. In his dissent, Alito noted, although the court provided class-wide relief, the district court never certified a class, and this court has never held that class relief may be sought in a habeas proceeding. Fascinating that is, don't you think? And although the court does not specify what it means by the government, it appears that the term is intended to embrace all the named defendants, including the president. Yeah, so that's what the government means. But most of the time, if you don't understand that wording right there, a lot of times they have to define terms when they use certain terms. This is why legalese can be so confusing sometimes, because, they use certain words in there. And, what do you mean by the government? What does that mean exactly? Like who? You talking about ICE agents? Or are you talking about IRS, federal, just a regular old federal employee? You got to define what that means by the government. So, yeah, they go through all these definitions, and it seems like, once again, what John Sauer is talking about here is all of these cases are all individualized. They were arrested in different places, blah, 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 blah. And the ACLU's case, they're trying to lump all these people together and block them from being deported. Like, as an aside right quick, how do you get on the side of Trinidad Aragua and sue the government to keep people here? For what reason are these people wanting to keep a terrorist organization members that invaded our country in the country? So they can get due process? Do these people really care? Do they? This is a serious question. Does the ACLU care about due process for everybody? Because if that is the case, how come we did not see anybody from the ACLU sue the government for holding American citizens without due process, putting them in jail for years without proper due process? How come we didn't get anything from the ACLU whatsoever on any January 6th defendant that did not get their due process rights, that were scooped up off the street, kidnapped, by the way, all for walking into a building? Some of these people showed up to the Capitol after the riot had done been cold and everybody sent the freak home. They showed up, walked around, and left. 6 months later, FBI pulls up, raids their house, and arrests them and put these people in jail. There are several cases like this. I've covered some of these cases, as a matter of fact, on this channel, and nothing from the ACLU. Democrats in concert right now are in a damn uproar, gnashing their teeth to the point that they are smashing their teeth out of their freaking mouth, yelling about due process for criminal aliens, but didn't say a damn thing when it's Trump supporters. This is the height of hypocrisy and double standards, folks. That is what this is. That is what we are seeing. And it's insane coming from these people. Alito says further in his 5-page dissent that the court did not first determine if they even have jurisdiction. The case was open in two lower courts, The Supreme Court could have taken the case on appeal. In this case, the ACLU brought the emergency petition without having taken the case through a lower court, so they skipped over the lower courts. They skipped over the appellate court to go straight to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, I'm not sure what's going on with this. They just said hold them for now. Maybe it has something to do with their recent decision over the Alien Enemies Act nonsense. That they said, oh, well, hang on. You can't deport these people without due process. We've got to have due process. Hey, look, I'm sorry. Joe Biden smuggled. Okay, that's hyperbolic. He didn't really smuggle anybody into the country. But he allowed people to just pour across our border. Right? Did they get due process when they came across the border into the country? No. So why should they get due process on their way out, is what I'm getting at. Why? Why do they get all these rights and all this nonsense when they're in the country illegally? That makes no logical sense, folks. Make it make sense to me. Seriously. Make it make sense. Now, you might throw out the argument, Well, maybe they didn't come in illegally. Well, then they don't have anything to worry about. They should have a visa, green card, some sort of identification papers showing that they came in through legal processes. If they don't, then I'm sorry. You must be an illegal alien. If you don't have any sort of paperwork at all, if you cannot produce anything that shows we allowed you to come into this country and said you could stay here, if you can't provide that to anybody, then why do you get due process rights? I don't get that one, folks. I really, really don't. I don't understand this whatsoever. Especially when they are gang members, terrorist members. When this court rushed to enter its order, Alito wrote, the Court of Appeals was considering the issue of emergency relief, and we were informed that a decision would be forthcoming. This court, however, refused to wait. The court also issued its ruling with only the papers from the applicants and no response from the government. The only papers before this court were those submitted by the applicants. The court had not ordered or received any response by the government regarding either the applicant's factual allegations or any other legal issues presented by the application. And the court did not have the benefit of a government response filed in any of the lower courts either. So that's insane. Once again, they made a ruling without the defendant even aware of that the ruling was going on here. They not only skipped over the lower courts, but they skipped over the opposition, for crying out loud. They just said, screw all of it. We're going to make this decision right now. Emergency relief. Now, sure, it's just emergency relief. It's not like some major decision or anything like that. However, in this country, we get due process rights. The government certainly is entitled to due process rights. If criminal terrorists are going to be entitled to due process rights, most certainly our own federal government should receive those same benefits. Am I right? It's insane, y'all. When the ACLU filed in the district court, that court gave the Trump administration 24 hours to respond. The Supreme Court, per Alito, jumped over that step unlawfully. That obligation to respond was dissolved when the Supreme Court usurped jurisdiction, which they most certainly have the right to do. But I don't think they have the right to just skip over the defendant's arguments. The defendant's arguments. The ACLU had said the Venezuelan illegal immigrants were in imminent danger from removal, a statement for which Alito said there was no evidence offered. Right? Once again, because Donald Trump and the Trump administration knows damn good and well about the Supreme Court ruling pretty much canceling the Alien Enemies Act without any sort of say from Congress. You got a law enacted by Congress, invoked by the Trump administration, and the Supreme Court says no, you can't do that. They just cancel legislation at will. I guess they have the right to do that, but it just doesn't seem like that should be the process, right? Doesn't seem like the Supreme Court can just go and decide what legislation stands and what doesn't, but I guess they do. The ACLU had raised the alarm, saying that the illegal immigrants were being boarded onto buses and taken to the airport at the time of their filing in court. Alito also cited a different case, Trump v. JGG, in which the Trump administration had already said that no deportations were planned for the days in question. In sum, he wrote, literally in the middle of the night, the court issued unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party, within 8 hours of received the application, with dubious factual support for its order, and without providing any explanation for its order. That is very fascinating to me, you guys. Very, very fascinating to me that they didn't inform the government at all of this. And once again, we're talking about a court proceeding here, and they just went with the statement that, the ACLU said, they're being boarded onto buses, you must act right now. and decided just, okay, rubber stamp, boom, put a hold on that. That's it. That is it. I find that fascinating, y'all. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just, I thought we were all about due process in this country, but clearly it's only due process whenever we feel due process is necessary. Or maybe it's only we have due process when it's politically advantageous for us to have due process. When it's not, who cares? We just do what we want. We just knock down any legislation we want. We just leave out the defendant from the court altogether. Screw it. Might as well. Now look, I know it maybe sound like I'm crying about this, and I kind of am. Just because I can, it's just fascinating to me how the court system works in this country, that they can just decide that a law that has been on the books for 250 years, well, not quite 250 years, let's say that was 1798, so 227 years. The law that's been on the books for 227 years, they can just, no, that doesn't exist anymore. And that's it. I understand checks and balances, y'all, but that just seems like one branch has a little bit too much power over what gets legislated and what doesn't. Look, I understand, this Alien Enemies Act nonsense, they didn't really go to court over the law itself. It was over the deportation using the Alien Enemies Act. Right now, I could understand overturning it if somebody sued the Trump administration specifically for the invocation of Alien Enemies Act, but it wasn't that. It was the people affected by the Alien Enemies Act that was the court case. It wasn't the Alien Enemies Act itself. And, with all this nonsense going on, it just gets overturned in the process. I think there needs to be a little bit more to that. If you're going to overturn the Alien Enemies Act, at least have the main focus of the court proceeding about the Alien Enemies Act and not people being derailed, I guess you could say, deported by the Alien Enemies Act. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying they don't have a right to overturn it, because that's kind of what the Supreme Court does, in a sense. You know what I'm saying? Because, you can pass a law, but Congress could pass laws, and the president, the executive branch or whatever, sign them into law or whatever, not veto it, have everything go through, and then the Supreme Court, somebody sues, and the Supreme Court says, no, this violates the Constitution, and that's it. But once again, folks, that's in a case where somebody specifically sues for that law, not for what is encompassed by the law, I guess you could say. It's fascinating to me. Y'all let me know what y'all think down in the comment section. That's all I got on this one, y'all. And I told y'all I wasn't trying to talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, because that right now, folks, is the story that doesn't end at all. It's continuing on. We've got more Democrats, as you saw with that headline, going down to El Salvador, trying to break a man out of prison. How about that, folks, for a headline? Democrats fly to El Salvador to break a man out of prison. What has this world come to, y'all? What has this world... Trying to rescue a Maryland father. Insane. Insane. But y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.